teaching tonight. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate the warm introduction that you've given. And I'd like to say something personal of my own. My wife, Sarah, who you may see in the grid of attendees here, and I moved to Providence very recently, just in mid-May, in the middle of this pandemic. And in spite of all
Peter, we muted the other participants to get rid of background noise, and there you go. You're unmuted now. Please continue.
Good. In spite of all of the difficulties of this strange time, the Temple Emanu-El community has made us feel tremendously welcome. And I'm really happy to have had the chance to meet so many of you already in person and to meet more of you, this way, and looking forward as soon as we possibly can to getting together face-to-face in this wonderful community that we are all members of. But thank you all for what it's been like so far. Now, let me tell you a bit about why I want to present these lectures. These lectures grow out of a struggle that I've had more or less my entire life, sometimes putting it out of my mind, but it's been a struggle that keeps popping up. I've been a Jew all my life, a scientist for most of it, and for many of us in the modern world, those two systems of thought don't seem to go together very well, and that was surely true for me for most of my life until not so many years ago, when I was inspired to read some of the books of Abraham Joshua Heschel, and I was struck by the extent to which his style of thinking and his style of explaining what Judaism was about and what God was about spoke to some of my most profound conflicts and confusions. So as I have gone back to Heschel and tried to understand what he was teaching us, I came to believe ever more strongly that by thinking carefully about what he had to say, one can learn a great deal and break down the sort of conflict that science and Judaism appear to have on the surface. So what I'm trying to do, starting tonight and in the subsequent two lectures, is to share with you what I learned from Heschel and how he helped me understand that science and God can go together. Paul has muted all of you at my request, but I want to make sure that we have a chance for questions. What I thought we would do tonight is, for the most part, I'll be speaking straight through for maybe 50 minutes, we'll see. If you have a question, please type in the chat that you would like to ask a question. And if it can wait to the end of my prepared remarks, don't write anything special. If it's urgent, indicate that in your message, and I will try to spot it. So I hope that system works okay tonight. I'm looking forward to our discussion at the end of this very much. So before I get into the content of this lecture, I want to give you an overview of the points I'll be trying to make tonight. First of all, tonight's focus is on the emotion of wonder. And wonder plays a role as an introductory emotion in many systems of thought. Scientists over and over again say that the emotion of wonder is what drives them to persevere in the difficult career of being a scientist. We'll hear from some key scientists in this lecture tonight. Many of us have noticed that in any kind of human response to the natural world, the emotion of wonder is what keeps us attracted to it. Heschel, in his writing, features wonder as a gateway into thought about God. And so it's sort of an entry, a gateway emotion into religious thinking. that much almost every reader of Heschel can spot, because he's very clear and almost repetitious about it. A point of his that he doesn't spend as much time on, but I think is essential to understand his thought, is that he points out that our own capacity to wonder is the most wonder-evoking aspect of the world. I'll come back to that later on. And I'm especially interested tonight to share with you some quotes from some of the best physicists and other thinkers of the 20th and 21st century to show you the extent to which there's a rather remarkable and somewhat surprising parallel, not only in speaking about wonder, but in speaking about how wonder might lead you to religious thoughts, even if you as a scientist might be surprised by that. So that's the overview of what I hope you'll learn tonight and what we can be discussing in the question period afterwards. So Rabbi Zarin mentioned a bit about my history as a physicist and the discovery about black holes that the experiment I worked on was privileged to make about 5 years ago. And I want to tell you just a bit about it, not because I want to give you a science lecture, as much as I like giving science lectures, this isn't the occasion for it. But what I'd like to do instead is tell you just enough to give you a sense of one of my most profound emotions of wonder. So in a moment, I am going to play an animation of an event that happened not just a long time ago, something over 1 billion years ago, in a galaxy 1.3 billion light years away from us. And I want you to watch these two black spheres drawn in the center of the picture, because they're going to do something rather remarkable. So let's see if the video will play. Indeed, you see those two black holes in a rather close orbit around each other, going around each other and disturbing the space around them. Now they're going faster, more disturbance, boom. They crashed into each other, shook all of space around them, and eventually things calmed down, but that disturbance, as you saw, traveled farther and farther away from those two black holes and that violent collision. That happened 1.3 billion years ago. We got the news on Rosh Hashanah 5776, otherwise known as the 14th of September, 2015. And we got it through the functioning of a brand new kind of telescope that we named LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. As I said, this isn't going to be a real science lecture tonight, so I can't explain everything wonderful and exciting about how LIGO worked and what gravitational waves are, other than to say they shook the universe, and that shaking reached us on Rosh Hashanah 5776. LIGO was equipped to listen to the vibrations of the universe and, like a good electric guitar pickup, turn those vibrations into an audible sound. And I'd like to play that sound for you, if I can. Now, the sound itself is rather low in pitch. As something of a purist, I'm going to try to play it at natural pitch first, but I fear that the speakers in most people's computers aren't up to it unless you have a very fancy desktop with nice stereo speakers on it. So after I make one attempt to play it at natural pitch, I'm going to play it in a way that I'm pretty sure everyone can hear. So let's give a listen to how the universe shook on Rosh Hashanah 5776. That was the shaking of the universe. Most of you didn't hear it, I'll bet. Let me play it for you, shift it up in pitch enough so that everyone's speakers can handle it. Give me 1 second here. You ready? Give me a thumbs up if you could hear that. Beautiful, thank you so much. Now, we shifted that up in pitch to be around the middle of a piano keyboard. It was actually a very low frequency rumble, just set at the bottom edge of the range of human hearing. But even though it was a bit hard to see, that thunder was one of the most dramatic events the universe has ever seen. During that fraction of a second, about 0.2 of a second that you heard shifted up in pitch to go, that vibration of space was carrying more energy than all of the starlight from all of the stars in the entire visible portion of the universe were emitting in those same 0.2 of a second. This was what was happening. And LIGO and the team of 1,000 physicists that I was privileged to work with on that experiment were the first to ever hear it. Now, any big event in anyone's life, there's a chain of emotions you go through. I remember getting the news right after Rosh Hashanah and first not believing it and then wondering if it could possibly be true. We spent 5 months getting ready to tell the world, checking whether it was correct. But I remember one particular time in the middle of the night, suddenly being sure that our detection was correct and realizing that what that meant was that our team of 1,000 physicists had heard the universe speaking to us through that thunderous sound in a way that no human beings had ever been privileged to do so. And it shook me. I remember really sort of quaking in some kind of emotion of wonder or awe in the middle of the night, one of those night thoughts that you get. And I realized that not only was this an important part of the scientific career of everyone in our team of 1,000 scientists, but for me, it was an important religious event as well. And so under the guidance of my rabbi, Andrew Pepperstone in Syracuse at the time, I went through the Siddur and learned that the right way to mark this occasion would be to recite the bracha that one recites on hearing thunder. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam shekocho ugvurato malei olam. Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, whose power and might fill the universe. Now, I couldn't say it publicly until we were ready to tell the world, which was February 11th, 2016. But then Rabbi Pepperstone gave me the honor of reciting it during Shabbat services. But it was a moving experience for me to recall what had happened in our little scientific world. And to me, as I recollect it now, I want to turn this experience that I had into a topic question for our time together tonight. And that is, all of us at one time or another have felt wonder. We'll talk about different sources of wonder in just a moment. But as we do, I want us to ask ourselves, does it make sense to think that the experience of wonder opens us to an encounter with God? That's the religious question that Heschel invites us to ask when we are feeling the emotion of wonder. And in addition to the concept of wonder and that special word that Heschel uses a lot, I want us to have in our verbal toolkit another related concept, another word that's less often used these days in English, but it's really important, and that's the word sublime. A sublime is a concept that you understand when you see the definition, even if you're not used to the word. So here are two different dictionary-style definitions of the concept of the sublime. One is evoking a feeling specifically of smallness, of being overpowered. And another related but not quite the same, different nuance is the sublime is something that inspires awe or wonder because of beauty, nobility, or grandeur. Now we're used to looking at images of the world and thinking that it's beautiful, but I think when we think about it a little bit more, we should realize that more often than not, we're not responding to beauty per se, but to the sublime. And let's actually look at some images, and as I show them to you, ponder, am I responding with an emotion that we could call the sublime? I'm responding to the sublime in the world. Here is a nighttime photograph of a beautiful pond in the wilderness, and the photographer has been careful to make the sky be exposed in such a way that not only do you see thousands and thousands of stars, but you can see across the middle of the picture the central portion of the Milky Way galaxy in which we live, collection of about 100 billion stars, of which we are in the outer portions. I think this is a beautiful picture, but when I think about it some more, maybe really what I mean to say is I get the feeling of the sublime. Let's move out a bit. Here is a photograph released from the Hubble Space Telescope not so many years ago. This is a region in which new stars are being formed out of the dust and gas in these three so-called pillars of creation. And here are some brand new stars just winking into existence. Wonder, the sublime, the motion of wonder at the sublime. Here at the opposite end of the stellar life cycle is a dying star. The dying star is this white spot right in the middle of the blue disk of this so-called planetary nebula. This one is called Helix Nebula. Beautiful, wonder-evoking, sublime. Here, not the Milky Way galaxy. We can't take a picture of the Milky Way galaxy, but here's another one, kind of a twin, at least a cousin of the Milky Way. This is a beautiful spiral galaxy that we see not from within, but looking at the whole face of the disk of 100 billion stars. Wonder-evoking, the sublime. Here's another spiral galaxy. This time, by chance, we happen to be seeing it from a direction where we are looking along the edge of the disk, not the face of the disk, but this one still has 100 billion stars. With some imagination, you can maybe realize how much this edge-on view of this spiral galaxy is like our view of the Milky Way from within. I'm especially fond of this particular galaxy. It goes by the name of NGC 4565. I studied it when I was doing my PhD research, searching for dark matter there. Didn't find it, unfortunately, even though I'm sure it's there. Here's now a pair of galaxies, but these two galaxies are so close to one another that their mutual gravitational attraction is actually destroying them. You can see they don't look beautiful and symmetrical, unlike, say, that. They're being torn apart. The stars, those hundreds of billions of stars in each one, are being stripped out of the galaxies and strewn across space. Does that give you a sense of the sublime as you look at it? Zoom out even farther. This is a photograph of a cluster of thousands of galaxies. Each smudge of light in this image contains 100 billion or maybe even 1 trillion stars, with just a few exceptions. The spots with spikes on them, like this one, those are stars in the Milky Way. Those are foreground things that get in the way of our clear view. But this object has a trillion stars, that one, 1 trillion stars, and every other smudge here, about 100 billion. So, have we had an experience of wonder at the sublime? Now, let's come closer to home. And these may be some images that give you more familiar feelings of wonder at the sublime. Let's see. This is all about our own response in the end. So here's a thunderstorm over the ocean. Does it make you feel small and powerless compared with the power of nature? A beautiful rainbow, but a beautiful rainbow in that powerful landscape, the sublime. Another mountain landscape with dawn or dusk, the power of the earth revealed in a volcano, the living part of nature, a more intimate view of the living part of nature, perhaps a more mysterious view of the living part of nature. So this is time for each of us to check in. Do these pictures succeed in evoking wonder? Have we looked at beauty or the sublime in a way that brings that emotion to the fore? You might guess that because I'm presenting these pictures, that these pictures work for me. But each of us has to ask her or himself that question. Have you felt this emotion, either here or later? I do want to suggest, though, a couple of other situations that might evoke feelings of wonder, perhaps even more strongly than the two sets of pictures that I've walked us through before. Let's see if these work for you. Now, here is something, I'm at a video that I found on YouTube that I think is pretty fabulous. This is, when I turn it on in a moment, you're going to see a computer animation, visualization, simulation, if you like, of what goes on inside a living cell. So we're not looking at human scale or the scale of nature around us, a few mountains. We're not looking at the cosmic scale. Instead, we're looking at the microscopic scale, literally 1/100th of a millimeter or smaller. 1/100th of a millimeter is the size of the whole cells. We're going to zoom way, way inside. So let's see whether this is going to work for you. So we'll look for about not quite 2 minutes of this animation. Starting out to set the scene, looking at blood flowing through a small blood vessel. And the animation is showing how white blood cells don't flow through the middle. They stick to the wall of blood vessels, and that's because of the molecular structures they have on their surfaces. Each of these beautifully colored things is a protein molecule in most cases, or some other tiny molecule inside a cell. Now we're zooming in to see this ladder-like structure that gives cells their structural integrity. These are so-called actin filaments. Here's an animation of actin filaments being assembled out of little molecular units that are their building blocks. Now we're going to see an enzyme cut an actin filament apart. Here's the assembly of a different kind of inside the cell structure, so-called microtubule. Now it's being taken apart. This one I love. At the bottom is a microtubule, a road. This big blue thing is a sac called a cargo vesicle, and it's being towed along that road, the microtubule, by a motor protein. Now we're looking around. These strings that are popping out here carry the genetic information in the cell. This is so-called messenger RNA. And now some proteins are going to come along and read out the message and form a new protein, the protein that's being coded for. And now things are going off and working in the cell. That's probably enough to illustrate what's going on in there. But let's think for a moment what we just were privileged to witness. We were privileged to witness something no human eye can ever see because it's so small. Those molecules were maybe 10 billionths of a meter across. They were doing fabulous things on their own, not directed by any director that we would recognize. And that's going on in every single cell of your body, every moment of your life. And this is something that's mostly hidden from us, but 20th and now 21st century science has revealed it to us. Here's a still picture that's maybe a reminder of what we just saw. This is a bacterium, and this has been hand-drawn by a great biological illustrator named David Goodsell. And he assures us that everything in here is drawn to scale. This cell is not just a bag of water with a little thing or two floating around in it. It's chock full of special purpose biomolecules all interacting with each other to make that cell alive. And that's just one bacterium. Now, because my own scientific background is in astronomy and physics, there's some astronomy numbers at my fingertips that I want to share with you and compare with some perhaps comparable numbers that come from the living world of a living cell. So I mentioned several times that a typical galaxy like the Milky Way in which we live has 100 billion stars, or maybe the biggest ones, 1 trillion stars. In the visible portion of the universe, there are about 1 trillion galaxies. So we can look out at the night sky, and if only we had slightly more sensitive eyes, we'd be looking at 10 to the 24 stars. Okay? Those are big numbers, astronomical numbers, as we said. But think about perhaps comparable numbers you might want to know about living cells. In just one of those cells, there are 100 million of those special protein molecules, those big lumpy things that carry out almost all of the functions of the cell. An individual human body has somewhere between 10 and 100 trillion of those cells, each of them doing all those activities we saw in the animation all the time. Even if we just focus on the brain, there are 100 billion cells in the human brain. And if instead of thinking about the individual cells, as important as they are, you ask the question, how many interconnections between one brain cell and another are there, so-called synapses? And best estimates are that there are 100 trillion interconnections between individual brain cells in your brain. Now, those numbers are maybe comparable to the astronomical numbers, but I'm even more flabbergasted by them because compared with stars, which in the end are actually rather simple, every single thing mentioned in this biology column on this slide is elaborately designed by some means or other. When I say design with scare quotes, I mean by evolution mainly, but nevertheless, set up in such a way that they carry out tremendously specialized functions. It's mind-boggling. In other words, wonder-evoking or sublime. So what I'd like to suggest is that, at least from my point of view, the functioning of living things might itself be a more profound source of wonder than any of the things that I was able to show you more conventional photographs of. I shouldn't do this to my own discipline, but more so than the galaxies, more so than the whole universe, more so than colliding black holes, I am in awe of how living things work, for their complexity, their functionality, the powers to survive, to modify their environment. Everything about living things and their functioning, to me, seems like an amazingly profound source of wonder. And now I would like to step back from the raw emotion of wonder and pose for us the question, can we, in any sort of organized way, arrange our thinking about which things in the universe are the most amazing, the most wonder-evoking? And I want to call this concept the ladder of nature. There's actually been a variety of names for this concept through the millennia. It's not a new idea. The ladder is a nice metaphor, though, because we have in our language, in our set of concepts, the notion that some things are higher than others. And I want to make clear, in case it isn't clear to anyone, what we mean when we say something is higher. The ladder of nature is an English language translation of an old Latin term, the scala naturae. Another English translation that used to be more popular was the great chain of being. This particular version of the ladder of nature has gone out of favor for very good reasons. It ended up being harnessed not only to ancient and not very complete science, but science that was then distorted to declare that some people were better than other people, an idea that I hope none of us are attracted to these days. But still, this notion of being able to arrange everything in nature on a scala, on a chain, or as I like to call it, a ladder, where we recognize more excellence for some things than others. It still shows up in biology as something called the tree of life. There's a discredited view of the great chain of being. I won't spend any more time on it unless someone really wants to ask a question, but I'm not begging for questions on this. I would rather we concentrate on other things. Here, though, is an attractive, somewhat modern view of the tree of life. So evocatively drawn as a tree, our ancestors down at the bottom, their evolutionary descendants toward the top. You may be able to pick out that among the roots of this tree of life is a one-celled creature. I think it's drawn as an amoeba, and there's all sorts of modern, very complex forms of life. Here is a human being up at this part of the top, another primate, a gorilla, other mammals, birds, reptiles, insects, plants, worms. The illustrator who drew this attractive tree of life was struggling between what used to be the most popular view of things, that we are at the top, and more primitive things at the bottom, down, down, down. That idea, to many scientists, is much less popular. So flowers and dragonflies are about the same height here as the human and the gorilla. Now here is a scientist's drawing of the tree of life, or as a biologist might say, among biologists, this is a phylogenetic tree. Each little stub of a line at the outer rim represents a current species. And we can see the evolutionary chain of descent from earlier ancestors by following those lines as they join closer and closer to the earliest common ancestor of evolution down here in the center. Now notice that all of the current species of life are drawn at the same distance from the center. There is no highest being shown here. Now, I'm almost positive that even if you have an excellent screen, you need also excellent vision on top of having an excellent computer screen to see this message that says, you are here. Here among the animals drawn in red, plants in green, fungi here, single-celled animals, bacteria, so on. For many purposes, this is a really good way to look at things. For other purposes, I think it's not. And I would like to dwell a little bit on one of my intellectual heroes, the philosopher of biology named Hans Jonas, who should be a much more household name than he is. He was one of the most important philosophers of biology. I highly recommend his book, The Phenomenon of Life. It's easy to get copies of it. He's also well known in the Green Movement as one of the key philosophers who gave birth to the field of environmental ethics. But for my purposes tonight, Jonas is important because he was unashamed to say, in spite of everything that was wrong with the old ideas of the great chain of being, there is nevertheless a visible, recognizable, ascending scale to nature. And I'd like us to pause and read this intricate but rather important sentence that he wrote. Jonas says, "The manifold of existing life presents itself as an ascending scale in which are placed the sophistications of form, the lure of sense and the spur of desire, the command of limb and powers to act, the reflection of consciousness, and the reach of truth." That's a long sentence, but it's basically a list, and it's a list in order of higher and higher powers of living things. So I've taken that sentence, and if anyone had opened up or maybe printed out the source sheet, then you can still have that sentence in front of you. It's number 1 on the source sheet. If not, don't worry, because I've taken the sentence apart and diagrammed it. And here is Jonas's list. And because it's an ascending scale, we need to read it from the bottom up. He said, "The manifold of existing life presents itself as an ascending scale in which are placed sophistication of form, lure of sense, spur of desire, command of limb, powers to act, a reflection of consciousness, and reach for truth." And so what we see is Jonas is taking the concept of the sublime and reinterpreting it, saying, beyond the old idea that the sublime points to the biggest, the most powerful, the toughest, the scariest things, we really ought to recognize that what is most evoking of wonder, awe, and amazement is what is highest on this ascending scale. And if you allow me to go back one slide to look at the list, look at the very highest powers, reflection of consciousness and reach for truth. Jonas is convincing us that as much as we don't want to be anthropocentric in any bad way, if we're intellectually honest, we need to recognize that in our world at least, human beings are the most capable, the most powerful, the most able to orient powers towards amazing things, reflection of consciousness, reach for truth. And he says, this gives us an especially powerful horizon of transcendence. And when he used that word transcendence, he knew full well that it has religious overtones to it. And sure enough, here is a very familiar verse that makes explicit those religious overtones. Bereshit Aleph, verse 27. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God did he create it, male and female, he created them. It's the only aspect of creation described in our holy text as being in the image of God. So Jonas, who comes from, is unashamed of his Jewish roots, knew whereof he was speaking. Now, I'd like us to, in the same spirit as I showed astronomy pictures and nature pictures and pictures of the internal functioning of cells, let's take a look at a few images of the images of God. One of my heroes, Einstein. If anything, a more amazing hero, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, great poet, Jory Graham, the great pianist, Andre Watts, crew of the Challenger, President Obama being inaugurated on the steps of the Capitol, and my favorite theologian, Abraham Joshua Heschel. But even though I picked my heroes to show, the point is not so much that it's heroes whom we should be in awe of, but instead it's our very humanity. So if you don't mind, I'm going to stop the screen share for a moment. And this is actually one of the most, this is more important than any slide I'm going to show you. Look around at the gallery. You are looking at a collection of images of God in our community here. Every one of us. And it's Jonas's point, my point, and as I'll show in a moment, Heschel's and perhaps others as well, that this that we're looking at here in the Zoom gallery is actually one of the most profound sources of wonder, the most sublime things that one could imagine. So let me see if I can come back, because in spite of where we are, and in spite of my saying the gallery is the most important thing, I do want to share with you some more words as well to solidify that idea. So let's ask in particular, what can it mean to be surrounded by so many images of God? And I'll pose it as a question, but it's a leading question. Are human beings even more evocative of wonder than are other living things? Or if they weren't to you before tonight, perhaps can I convince you that they should be? And can awareness of this help to bring us closer to God? And here's where I want to bring to the fore the writing and thinking of Abraham Joshua Heschel. There are his dates, very much a person of the 20th century. He grew up being groomed to be the next Rebbe in a long, very distinguished line of Hasidic Rebbes. He had an inspiration, I'm pretty sure, as a young person, that even before that world fell apart in the terrible tragedies of the 20th century, he felt the need to share his religious insights with the wider secular world that was very visible to him growing up in Warsaw. So he went to a non-Hasidic seminary and then to the University of Berlin. And after earning both a second German smicha as well as a PhD, he ended up having to flee one step ahead of the Nazis, came to the United States, and spent most of his adult career at JTS in New York City. He wrote a number of books and an even larger number of articles. In these lectures, I'm going to focus on 3 of his books that all came out within a few years of each other. The Sabbath, I won't have much to say about it tonight, but next week it will play a big role. Man is Not Alone, and God in Search of Man, all from the first half of the 50s. And on Heschel's behalf, please forgive him for the sexist language of man and not humanity. He was a person of his time. Now, here are a few selections of Heschel on the emotion of wonder. No one can sneer at the stars, mock the dawn, ridicule the outburst of the spring, or scoff at the totality of being. Standing between heaven and earth, we're silenced. He wrote in a very poetic style, as everyone recognizes. Here's something perhaps more to the point. There is so much more meaning in reality than the soul can take in. To our sense of mystery and wonder, the world is too incredible, too meaningful for us, and its existence the most unlikely, the most unbelievable fact, contrary to all reasonable expectations. Even our ability to wonder fills us with amazement. Now, I put in bold there the sentence that makes my point, but he kind of pulls his punch a bit with that word even. I think he means especially. And here is another sentence where Heschel isn't shy about saying especially. Here's where Heschel says, wonder refers to all of reality, not only to what we see, but also the very act of seeing, as well as to our own selves, to the selves that see and are amazed at their ability to see. The most incomprehensible fact is that we comprehend at all. So I think Heschel is pretty clear that not only is wonder important, but that there's a hierarchy of phenomena in existence that evoke wonder, and our own reflections about our existence, our own wonder, is perhaps the highest, most powerful source of wonder at all. And I'm guessing that a large fraction of people on this Zoom call tonight have read some Heschel, and if you have come across these statements or statements like this. He's known as the apostle of wonder, if I may put it that way. But when we know that, we sometimes might be surprised at how many other people from different parts of our culture say similar things. For example, he and Hans Jonas are saying rather similar things, but even great scientists like, for example, my hero Einstein, have said rather remarkably similar sounding things. Here's a bit of a long quote by Einstein, but let's ponder it a bit because I think it will repay the reading. The fairest thing we can experience, Einstein said, is the mysterious. He who knows it not and can no longer wonder, no longer feel amazement, is as good as dead, a snuffed out candle. It was the experience of mystery, even if mixed with fear, i.e. awe or the sublime, that engendered religion. A knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, of the manifestations of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which are only accessible to our reason in their most elementary forms. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitute the truly religious attitude. Now, I don't want to misrepresent Einstein's religious thinking. He came from a Jewish background, but he was not a believing Jew in any of the senses that we mean when we normally join an organization like Temple Emanu-El. But nevertheless, I think Einstein is an eloquent spokesperson for this pathway into the religious attitude through the emotion of wonder. Now, here's something that when I came across this thought, I was even more astounded. Einstein is kind of a secular saint. Almost every human being recognizes his face and reveres him. There was a time when the entire reading public at least knew Richard Feynman. If I could see the whole gallery, I'd want to do a poll right now, whether his name is familiar to the folks here. Let me just assert, good, I see a thumbs up. Let me just assert that maybe just half or quarter of a rank below Einstein, Feynman was one of the truly great physicists of all time. And there was a popular vogue for Feynman, not of reverence for his near saintliness, but enjoyment of his irreverent humor and puncturing of sacred cows, if I may call them that. But here's something that Feynman said, and this is even a little bit longer than the Einstein quote, but it's so important, I want to read it carefully with you all. So, Feynman wrote, it is a great adventure to contemplate the universe beyond man, to contemplate what it would be like without man, as it was in a great part of its long history and as it is in a great majority of places. When this objective view is finally attained and the mystery and majesty of matter are fully appreciated, to then turn the objective eye back on man viewed as matter, to view life as part of this universal mystery of greatest depth, is to sense an experience which is very rare and very exciting. Gets better though. Here's how the paragraph goes on. That intellectual adventure he just described usually ends in laughter, at least to Feynman, and a delight in the futility of trying to understand what this atom in the universe, this thing, atoms with curiosity that looks at itself and wonders why it wonders. Some will tell me that I have just described a religious experience. Very well, you may call it what you will. Then in that language, I would say that the young man's religious experience is of such a kind that he finds the religion of his church inadequate to encompass that kind of experience. The God of the church isn't big enough. Now, Feynman was being a little artful in his use of the word church. His parents were Jewish, but secular Jews, and Feynman spent his life professing atheism. But as I read this statement, I think Feynman just didn't get a good enough Jewish education to realize that the profoundest religious thought was precisely aligned with Feynman's own recognition of the amazingness of existence. And in particular, just as Heschel said, although in Feynman's words he calls them atoms with curiosity, namely human beings, and Feynman's only problem, although it was a big one, with religious thought was that no one had told him that the idea of God was actually interesting. He believed the Sunday school stories of his youth and recognized them for what they were, kid stories that didn't deserve adult allegiance. So I think if Heschel could have had a conversation with Feynman on the subject, imagine Heschel trying to get Feynman in a room to bend his ear on this, I'm not sure it could have worked, but if only Feynman had had the patience, Heschel would have told Feynman that he just needed to shed his childhood memories of Sunday school education and thought instead about an adult vision of a bigger God. And my favorite quote from Heschel that I would love to imagine him being able to share with Feynman was this one. This then is an insight we gain in acts of wonder, not to measure meaning in terms of our own mind, but to sense a meaning infinitely greater than ourselves. Wonder is not a synonym for the unknown, but rather a name for a meaning which stands in relation to God. So I've come to just about the end of my prepared slides, but I want to summarize in a way that you can carry a few crisp lessons forward to lecture number 2, which will happen a week from tonight, and I hope to see many of you there. And the lessons that I'd like you to have with you when you rejoin me a week from tonight is, first of all, the reminder that wonder is a powerful gateway into both scientific discovery and religious thought. Second, and kind of in parallel at first, we shouldn't be afraid to recognize which aspects of existence are higher than others in this very specific sense of Jonas's ascending scale. And then finally, to at least remember my claim that I'm trying to convince you of in case it seems in need of convincing, that the highest things are the things most evocative of wonder. So now what I'd like to just close is by giving you a tiny preview of the remaining 2 lectures. They will be on successive Tuesday nights at 7:30. When I'm here on Zoom, hoping to see many of you a week from tonight, I'll be talking about the problem of time. When I first thought I might be interested in physics, I thought physics had time nailed. I thought physics was the study of space and time, and physics is great, so we understand time, but it turns out time is a great mystery. And to understand it, we'll need not only the resources of science, but also of philosophical and religious thought, and that's what I'll want to walk us through a week from tonight. And then 2 weeks from tonight, I want to make good on my claim that there is a new bridge to be built between science and religion, and I'll do it by showing why and how, based on the thinking of Abraham Joshua Heschel, that it really can make sense for someone to be 100% loyal to belief in science and also to belief in God. So, hope to see you next week and the week after. And now I'm going to stop my share and ask people to start posing questions. I imagine that many of you have them. If you want to type, I've got a question, please, in the chat box. That will be helpful because I can't see everyone in the gallery. Who's got questions for me? None? It was 2.
I put a question in the chat box.
Don't tell me that that's the case. Really?
Okay. Question was based on your Einstein.
Do a poll.
The question was
of you
your Einstein
are
quote.
willing to buy that we should be more in awe of human beings than of the vast universe. Did I make a sale on that? Raise your hand if I made a sale. I'm not seeing many hands up, so someone should be courageous and challenge me on my main point.
Peter, you have some questions in the chat box.
Okay. Larry Smith, good. Okay, so I'll read Larry's question, and then Larry, you can speak up and amplify it if you want. Larry writes, when Einstein wrote, God doesn't play dice with the universe, do you think that that was an expression of faith or awe or a glib way to dismiss quantum mechanics? So Larry, if you could unmute yourself, is that a good enough framing of the question?
Yes, going into what I've always been told, that Einstein was a Jew who didn't practice and no longer believed, considered himself somewhat of an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
That quote always struck me, and especially when he wrote it. I think he referred to it as the old man and the holy one. I don't think he used the word God.
Yes.
And to me, that was an expression of faith.
Yes. Okay. That's a great question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a bit more about Einstein's religious thought. So he did not have much truck with organized Judaism, organized religion of any kind. And yet, that was a genuine quote that I shared, and your quote that is also 100% genuine when he said, to anyone who would listen, quantum mechanics can't be right because God doesn't play dice with the universe. And for anyone who needs a one-sentence summary of quantum mechanics, it replaces the idea that the universe is a machine that evolves in a completely determined way with a lot of randomness, hence his analogy of the dice. So why was Einstein comfortable speaking about God in a sentence like God doesn't play dice when he was not a conventional religious believer? And I think the key is it was not a glib way to dismiss quantum mechanics. He struggled with quantum mechanics. The last thing he'd want to do is be glib, but in particular, it also was not a glib use of religious terminology. Einstein very much believed that the universe gives profound evidence of having been the product of reason, of rational thought. As he saw it, the very fact that the universe is governed by laws of nature suggests that those laws were given. Now, what Einstein didn't accept was a God who was in any recognizable way personal, except to the extent that he recognized that the universe was governed by laws and therefore there must have been a giver of those laws. So Einstein often said that his favorite religious thinker was Spinoza, another highly alienated person of Jewish heritage. But I doubt if any of our rabbis would want to be giving many sermons based on quotes from Spinoza. Spinoza was as disaffected a Jew as there ever was, so disaffected that he was excommunicated from the Amsterdam Jewish community in the 17th century with one of the most vituperative, vicious decrees of harem ever written. And this was Einstein's religious teaching. So I think it's important for us to take from Einstein what he wanted to teach us about his view of religion and then to recognize where that stood. It was quite profound, but let's not just imagine that we would see Einstein in the pews on Yom Kippur in a normal year. Okay, Mark Bram, you said you have a question. Please go.
Yeah, it's the question basically is I want to tell you where I'm at, and you can tell me if this sounds heretical or what your view of this, of my view is. I'd like to preface it by saying, besides being a musician, I teach internal Chinese martial arts. I've been doing it for 40 years. And I always try with my advanced students to bring the stuff that I do with Qi around to science, electrically charged particles, sensory overload, things like that, to try to explain what's going on and try to take the magic out of it. Yes. And when we start to talk about personal views and religion, and they know I'm Jewish, I say, and they ask me my view, I say, I'm a Jew. I go to temple because I'm a Jew. I feel connected to this. But I know one thing, and that is that I don't know anything. There's an old Jewish saying, God, if you were a God I could understand, what kind of God would you be? So if we're still trying to understand the relationships of black holes to one another, time, string theory, there was dimensions missing, and then it was M theory, and then they're trying to resolve all these different things, and we don't understand that yet, and you believe that God created this. How can you know the nature of God? Or even if there is a God, I choose to pray every night and believe that there is, but I'm not fooling myself that I know the whole process of it or what that means, because it's so deep. There's so much to it. So I connect the way I want to connect. I form my thoughts. It focuses my thoughts. I feel connected to the energy, and I go with that. But I always am suspect of anybody that says, I know what God is.
No, thank you very much for that. That's a profound statement and got a lot of profound truth to it. And since you ask a profound question, I want to give it the most respectful answer that I can, even if I'm going to steal a tiny bit of my thunder from future lectures, doesn't matter. I'll tell you what Heschel's answer is to that question. For Heschel, wonder that we've been talking about tonight is the gateway. It's the gateway emotion. It doesn't give answers. Wonder raises the question, what kind of universe are we in? This universe is so amazing in not only the astronomical, not only nature, not only microbiology, not only human beings, especially human beings. It's all wonderful. How can it be? It raises a question. It doesn't give an answer. And then Heschel says, okay, it's really important to know that that's the question. And then wonder won't take you any farther. And Heschel's move, it's wonderful to behold. You can see it happen in the turn of a paragraph break. He says, once you've got this question, if you, like me, are of the heritage of Israel, you have the words of the prophets to at least give you some guidance about what's going on. It doesn't say they give absolute knowledge. They surely don't give absolute knowledge about the natural world, nor do they give any specific knowledge about God. But what we do have in our possession, and here I'm paraphrasing from Heschel, is we have guidance from over the millennia about what God wants from us. And the Jewish style of religion, if I may pontificate just a tiny bit, focuses a lot more on what's asked of us than on what we're supposed to believe in terms of a list of beliefs. We don't have a thick catechism in Judaism. We have the Rambam's 13 Articles of Faith. Not everyone accepts them, okay? You don't have to swear allegiance to the Rambam's 13 Articles to be a good Jew, but you do have to pay attention to the commandments, to the mitzvot, what God asks of us. So it's 100% honest to say, I don't know who God is in any detail other than people we respect have told us that they've heard God's voice and that we have their words to then reflect upon and ask ourselves, does this sound like God's voice? So I hope that's at least a beginning of an answer to your question, Mark. And if it's okay, I'll move on to a question from Rochelle Rosen, who writes, do you think that the wonder drawn from scientific thought and discovery naturally leads one to the wonder that can be found in the study of God? Rochelle, do you want to amplify on that a bit, or should I just go ahead and respond?
Well, it was actually me asking the question. This is
okay.
Peter. Thank you for the wonderful speech, the talk. It was very informative. You talked about how similar that the wonder of science and the wonder that drives scientific discovery, how similar it is to the wonder that drives religious thought. And I was wondering if you think that, you know, it's sort of natural to wonder about both, or are they exclusive in some way? Yeah.
How about somewhere in between those two extremes? That's a great question. So I could answer sociologically and point out that a smaller fraction of working scientists are active practitioners of organized religion than the general public. So that sociological statement already says, no, it's not natural to move from one to the other. Now, there could be all sorts of reasons for that. I've heard colleagues say, well, scientists are smarter than other people, and okay, religion is stupid. You know, okay, you can make up really nasty interpretations of that. You could say scientists are so distracted by the baubles of the beautiful physical aspects of the world that they don't tend to be drawn to thinking the other kind of wonder questions that lead more directly to religious thought. Or you could say, I don't know. I mean, I know not just Einstein and Feynman, who clearly had religious feelings, even though they denied it because they'd been badly educated in religion, but I know a number of other scientists who are profoundly religious and connected to religious institutions. But I think to the extent that your question goes on, is there a natural road? No, it's not natural. You have to be either inclined that way or come across someone like Heschel who will try to incline you in that way. And then then the question is an open one. So
Thank you very much.
was that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Amy. Thank you, Amy. All right. All right, I won't read the compliments here aloud because I'm a modest person, but Amy says that she's feeling that wonder is the direct manifestation of God. Amy, do you want to amplify that remark at all?
Yes. I feel in a way that I'm experiencing some of what you're saying backwards. That yes, I was moved to tears actually when you had us all on the screen and had us sort of embrace our humanity. So you, like Heschel or scientists or whoever is teaching us or inclining us towards the holy, I think that they are validating, you are validating what we would, in the best case scenario, intuitively experience as wonder if we were freed from low self-esteem or over-intellectualizing or having to make a living or having to kind of get through the day. Because if we said blessings that have been written for us through the ages for every moment, it would be hard to like hold down a job, you know? So I guess what I really was feeling while you were talking was that I didn't want there to be a space between the aha of wonder and then thinking, okay, this is a portal to God, so I need to have an encounter with God. I wanted to save time and have a direct infusion intravenously of God. and I'm wondering about the word wonder. I'm wondering about the word wonder and whether that really is equal to God. That's how it feels to me.
Uh-huh. Okay, that is a really interesting thought. And let me answer it by saying, I see the appeal of it, but now I'm going to claim that I'm channeling Heschel for a moment and insist in his voice that there is meaning beyond the mystery. And so he wanted wonder to be thought of as opening the questions and opening your mind, but not that that's insufficient to feeling 100% fulfilled as a religious person. Now, you don't have to accept it because I'm saying it, and you surely don't have to accept it because I say, I understand what Heschel was saying, even though I will argue with you that I think I do understand what Heschel is saying. But what I would like to ask you to do is not feel discouraged that I said that's not the name Heschel thought, but wait until I pick up on exactly the thought you gave, namely that this experience of being surrounded by images of God is this powerful, powerful experience of wonder that in somehow is in fact connecting us to God. And by the end of the third lecture, I'm going to frame it in a different way that might make you more comfortable with saying, okay, wonder doesn't have to be God, but I can see how short a step it is from that experience of wonder. I'll try to make it short, but not of zero size. Okay, thanks for that. And I see one other question in the chat from Katja Ginsberg-Braun. So Katja, you wrote, since you had asked whether some people were not convinced that humans were the most worthy of wonder, I just wanted to follow up on why I cannot definitively answer in the affirmative. Go for it, please unmute yourself and make the case.
All right, so I am somebody who maybe is not an original thinker, but is very, very fond of books and interesting words. So inevitably, I'm going to start with two completely stolen sources. And one of them was just a wonderful old Jewish saying, heaven only knows where it comes from. It's probably lived through many iterations. And it runs something like, if triangles could have a god, it would have three sides. And the other is a delightful essay that perhaps is overquoted, but something to the point of what it's like to be a bat. And the whole point is that, I think to both quotes, but taking the bat one first, is that human beings by definition, because of our way of thinking and being, cannot possibly understand what it is to be a bat, that the best we can come up with is trying to picture what it's like to act like a bat, to get around by echolocation, to fly, to eat bugs, travel by night, what have you. But we simply do not perceive the world as they do. We do not think the way we do. And even if one of us were to be magically transformed into a bat temporarily, we would not be able to tell other humans what it was like for us. And by the time we were magically transformed back, we would again be back to a human perception and therefore would no longer have quite the same experience. So while I absolutely take the point of wondering about humans and having great awe at humans, I'm in awe of my grandmother of blessed memory, who was an underage guerrilla in World War II and fought the Nazis as a young girl. I am in awe when I look at my not quite 3-year-old granddaughter, who was born with a heart condition and who has every reason to suffer, and yet is the most joyful child, and whom I love when I truly did not expect to be able to experience that emotion for any child of any kind. I am not sure that you can exactly take that anthropocentric thing, because I love the idea of us as sort of a lump of atoms that wonders and that asks questions and that feels, but the truth is that we pride ourselves on that uniqueness because we know that about ourselves. We do not know, we are kind of guessing what it is that our cats feel as far as wonder and the sense of the sublime and whatever religion they may or may not possess, much less what on earth or in heaven goes on in the being and the life of a tree. So I love the idea of being in wonder of humans, and I love the idea of that being a conduit, but I'm not sure it is the top conduit or the unique one, as it were, for the whatever it's worth.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that eloquently expressed set of thoughts. Please don't think that you need to be so modest. First of all, thank you for that quote from Thomas Nagel, one of my favorite philosophers, the one who wrote the article, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Everyone should seek that article out. It's fabulous. And furthermore, to say that you're not an original thinker, but you've just read some interesting things, how do any of us learn? So I think you're being too modest. And let me share with you something I read. There was an interview late in his life with Leonard Bernstein, who was surely my mother's great hero when she was growing up and still one of mine. And he said, everyone steals. The trick is to do good steals, right? So by all means, read everyone and pick out the ideas that are good. And why not question whether Jonas's idea that I'm claiming Heschel is also defending, why not raise the question, is that anthropocentric and not justified? It's a completely valid concern. On the other hand, I would argue that after we've raised that concern about our thinking, we get to ask, okay, I should worry. Am I being anthropocentric? Could cats really be doing something more amazing? Are trees truly more amazing? Let's spend hundreds, thousands of scientists' careers trying to figure out, are trees cooler than we know? Are cats cooler than we know? Dolphins more amazing than we know? It's a perfectly wonderful question. Even if we made an amazing discovery that dolphins actually had powers far beyond anything we ever thought we could appreciate or aspire to, I think in the end, it would only make my point stronger in the sense that the last thing I want to do is argue that humans are great and God is like a superhuman and that's it. If there are things in existence, let's call them dolphins, I have no idea if this is true of dolphins, who have even more amazing powers than us. God bless them, and God bless a universe in which such amazing creatures exist. So I think that aside from the careful thinking that your question calls us to do, it actually opens up a possibility that would be maybe more inspiring than you made it sound in the framing of your question. So it's a great thought. Let's be on the lookout for even more amazing things to admire, and let's critique all of our grand thoughts and make sure that we aren't turning God into some big guy in the sky, but that we end up with a concept of God worthy of God. Okay, I've come to the bottom of the chat. Does anyone else have a question that they were too shy so far to put forward? I thought maybe I saw a hand being raised a moment ago. Was that correct? Okay, if not, once I saw the chat, those were all great questions. Thank you, Amy, for pointing me to where I said they should go. And thank you all for your attention. I really enjoyed this. Hope it was worthwhile for you. And if it was, see you again next Tuesday for lecture 2. Okay, good night, everyone.
Yasher koach, toda rabah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Opened up a lot of thoughts for me.